In the tradition of Malcolm X, peace be unto you. What you're looking at is a flower called the Venus flytrap. It has a unique coloration. When it displays bright petals, insects are attracted to its colors. Do you see the green, yellow, and red colors? Look closely. You can see them. Now, consequently, some of the insects buzzing around the flower petals impulsively land on them. Insects are limited to very impulsive forms of behavior. They are triggered by external qualities and things around them without thought. Once on the petals, an insect may be drawn deep inside the plant's bulb by the sweet scent of pollen. But then, once inside, all of a sudden, the petals quickly close around the insect because this plant is carnivorous. This plant eats flesh. It devours insects. The plant uses a strategy which serves it in its best interest. The plant is stationary. It can't move, so it relies on a passive-aggressive tactic. It uses a benign tactic to lure its prey into its trap. The strategy of the Venus flytrap plant is very relevant to what I want to say to you about American descendants of slaves today. Millions of Generation Z, X, and millennial descendants of slaves have become willing victims of benign exploitation. Let me explain or define exactly what benign exploitation is. Benign exploitation means victimization which is characterized by financial or sexual exploitation of a person or group of people by another person or group of persons or a company like a corporation. Perpetrators induce in their victims false trust in others that have the intent to lure a prospect into an inescapable exploitation. Usually the victim is first psychologically profiled. The victim then is lured into a trap by their own appetites or desires for pleasure, for some object or person which makes them feel euphoric. That definition and the marketing strategies described above is what is happening in real time. Cartoons, comic books, and the vulgar music have always been used by Hollywood movie industries, comic book publishing companies, and recording companies to benignly load up the subconscious mindscape of children with negative stereotypes to foster self-hatred or feelings of inferiority. And now we've got to add to the list YouTube ghetto storefront shows. For example, I analyzed 16 YouTube shows by content. They were shows oriented to African Americans, descendants of slaves. I then categorized them into 4 types. 1, consumer promotion. 2, gossip and celebrity. 3, informative. 4, scam-oriented shows. And as you can see, a total of 3,615,932 viewers watched at least one of these shows during the week. And here's what may be startling to you. 91% or 1,337,894 of the total viewers watched consumer promotion shows. 7% watched informative shows. And 2% or 72,318 viewers watched shows oriented to scam them out of money. Here is another example. I have used here the 80-20 rule. Remember, the 80-20 rule is used to analyze what factors are dominant in the marketplace. who is having the most influence, who is making the most sales. I analyzed shows between November 3rd and November 11th of 2019. Now, if you look closely at the bar chart of the Pareto analysis, you will see that CJ So Cool had the greatest influence, the greatest psychological influence on Generation Z, X, and Millennial YouTubers out of all the shows which I analyzed. That means that the majority of YouTubers who are in Generation Z, X, and the Millennial group are more psychologically influenced, more attracted to CJ So Cool. And if you look at the second, R Revolt TV and other promotional shows, that they far outweigh shows that are informative, shows that are attempting to uplift African Americans and to change their condition for the better. 80% of all the influence was made by CJ So Cool and R Revolt Television. We have to face that as a challenge. Remember the divided line? Remember that according to the 4 quarters of the divided line, those folks at the very bottom, if you look at the arrow, you'll see number 1, are individuals who are more focused on immediate sensations, thoughtless sensations. They are more focused on conjecture, more focused on images. And if you look at the second level, if you look at the red arrow, you'll see number 2, it says opinion. These are folks who are true believers. They believe in their perceptions. They judge by appearances. And their judgments, of course, do not penetrate appearance to identify the principles that lay behind them. Those are the folks, those are the descendants of slaves who are most attracted to those types of shows, like the insects that are trapped in the Venus fly plant. As you can see, YouTube has provided a place for virtual ghetto participation. The virtual ghetto is a space on YouTube wherein storefronts, just like the thousands of storefront churches which blanketed communities where descendants of slaves lived, and their minds for over 100 years. They attract the more passive-minded descendants of slaves to their sites, those on the extreme end of the divided line. They number into the millions of descendants of slave viewers across the nation. This situation is worse than television ever was. It is worse than the most negative hip-hop music. They are becoming the most psychologically destructive instruments ever employed on American descendants of slaves' youth for over 100 years. These shows are the enemies of descendants of slaves' mental liberation. As such, they are the enemies of us all. These shows represent a general American descendant of slave mental and physical decay. It is accelerating. It is represented in real spaces and times by actual physical and mental illness in our communities. Yes, isn't it obvious to all who can see that crazy is the new norm? Crazy has been normalized in large swaths of the American descendant of slaves population. These YouTube shows use a very benign method of recruitment and exploitation to induce young American descendants of slaves' children into lifestyles of consumerism, just as the Venus fly plant feeds on the flesh of insects. These shows paint a vivid picture of what American descendants of slaves culture is becoming and will be this century. And yes, it is frightening. These shows define the only present and future practical value for having descendants of slaves in society. Our sole value to society is now becoming reduced to that of all-purpose consumers, to consume all the frivolous products made by white supremacists or to be pimped in penitentiaries across this nation. Why, you may ask? The answer is because for YouTube, PayPal, and thousands of banks across the United States and the world, it is no different, in effect, than us picking cotton on a slave plantation and thereby growing wealth for others, but with one twist. Plantation slavery was involuntary. It was forced. The new plantation grows wealth for others by your voluntary enslavement, by your passive submission. I am under no illusion that we can stop it alone. We can't stop it because they employ powerful emotional and sexual methods of seduction, especially on all those with passive subconscious minds. The fact is that American descendants of slaves have no measurable collective economic or political self-determination in the United States. And even if we wanted to save ourselves and lift others up, we could not do it because our legislators and our preachers are not free from white supremacist ideology. Most of them are a part of the exploitative process, the process of benign exploitation from your cradle to your grave. The only possible strategy that we can employ successfully is to uncover their intentions, as well as those who are orchestrating their efforts to expose them. To muster up the amount of self-determination needed to do that has never been achieved before by us. But we do have the potential. The question is whether we can actualize it, whether or not we can work together, while at the same time sharing our unique messages to American descendants of slaves. What do you think? I am Dr. Stephen Nur Ahmed. Peace be unto you.
I really enjoyed this video, and I hope you did as well. If you enjoyed Stephen's talk, please support this channel, thumbs up, and share this video. And please do not forget to subscribe.